So today's Healing Sunday, and we're talking about anger. So let's talk about it. There are different kinds of anger, aren't there? Can we name a few kinds of anger? Okay, righteous anger, and we're going to come back to that one in just a minute. What other kinds of anger are there? Resentment. Yeah, there's kind of that frustration, annoyance, anger. Someone or something is kind of getting on your nerves. It's anger, right? But it might be like small a anger. And maybe it's justified or maybe it's not. Maybe you act on it, maybe you don't. It's the kind of anger that might get us muttering under our breath, right? My partner loaded the dishwasher wrong again. That guy parked over the line. Can that lady please stop clicking her pen? You know, that sort of thing, right? What other kind of anger are there? What's that? Frightful anger, when we're scared. Sometimes we get angry when we're scared. Sure. Slow burn anger. Okay, so maybe that grudge that just gets a little bigger year after year. Sure. Yeah, I heard righteous anger, a justice anger. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that one in just a second. How about cranky anger? Sometimes I kind of like to call that kind of anger toddler anger, though of course it doesn't just affect toddlers. Being hangry, hungry, angry would be a type of cranky anger. Lashing out irrationally or being grumpy or disagreeable or irritable because you're overtired or you're sick or you're in pain. Those are all forms of cranky anger, right? Okay. Protective or defensive anger. Yeah, that's a great example. And of course, there's rage, right? When anger absolutely consumes us and we become this wrecking ball of destruction, taking out everything in our path, whether it deserves it or not, right? There's often a lot of collateral damage to that kind of anger. How about the anger we feel when we're in a group? Riot anger, you might call it. Kind of that group think when we get swept up into a mob and we all start amping each other up and the anger just swirls and builds and becomes bigger until it's uncontrollable. And then a couple of you mentioned it, but there's good kinds of anger too, right? There's righteous anger, there's justice anger. We might call that zealous anger. And that's the kind of anger we feel at injustices. Zeal is that anger that can fuel good, positive action. It can be that driving force, that energy we need, that motivation to do good in the world, right? Well, that's the kind of anger I want to talk about today. Zeal, zealous anger. That good anger, that righteous anger at injustice. When we talk about having an angry God, I think that's mostly what we mean, right? We have a zealous God. We have a fierce mama bear God who gets angry whenever any of her beloved creatures or creations are mistreated, right? It's also zeal which Jesus embodies in his most angry moments, right? Like that moment when he flips the table of the money changers there in the temple, right? Of course, Jesus was also fully human, and so he has his cranky anger moments too, right? There's that time when he curses and shrivels up that fig tree because it wasn't providing enough shade. Poor fig tree. But back to zeal and zealous anger. This is the kind of anger that feels holy, it feels good, it feels Christ-like. It's the kind of anger that we feel we have a moral obligation to engage in a lot of the time. There's something wrong with us, we think. We've stopped being good people, we think, when we are unmoved by the injustices we see around us. When witnessing injustice, when it doesn't spark that zealous anger in us, sometimes we feel like we've lost our humanity, lost that imago Dei, that reflection of God in us, that we've somehow lost our way in following Jesus. But when you live in a world that is rife with injustices, When you are walking through an election season like we are now, where politicians nearly daily make your blood boil with their fear-mongering or their lack of care for God's beloved or their willingness to sell out and cause harm or enact harmful policies just to win, just to stay at the top. When you live in that kind of environment, staying zealous, staying angrily responsive to all that injustice around you, it's exhausting, isn't it? Any of you felt that lately? It's exhausting. Anger is one of those primal emotions for us humans. And obviously it must have served some positive survival purpose. Otherwise it would have been naturally selected out of our DNA. Here's what happens to our bodies when we get angry. Our heart rate and our blood pressure rise. Adrenaline is released throughout our whole body. Our muscles tense up. Our breathing rate increases. Our body temperature rises. We sweat. Our blood flow increases to our limbs and our extremities and decreases to our gut. Our face flushes. Our attention narrows right down to that target of our anger. And neurotransmitters in our brain start releasing, causing this burst of energy in us. Now that's really great, isn't it, if you're getting ready to fight a bear? But it's not so helpful when you're talking about tackling human systems of injustice. And it's not a sustainable state for our bodies, right? Chronic anger, we know, can lead to health issues like high blood pressure and heart problems, headaches, skin disorders, digestive problems. And it doesn't really matter, frankly, if it's rage or crinkly toddler anger or that righteous, zealous anger. Our bodies experience it sometimes the same. As I told you in the announcements last week, my sermon for today was inspired by a friend of a friend who, in response to the question, "What sermon do you need to hear during this election season?" wrote, "I feel a moral obligation to stay angry all the time, but I'm so tired of being angry all the time." So today we are going to talk about how to follow our call to zeal, to zealous anger for God, how to follow it in a world of injustice upon injustice without totally losing our health or our sanity or our spiritual grounding. And to explore that, I want to turn to a biblical character, a prophet in the Hebrew Scriptures. We just read about him, a guy named Elijah. Now, Elijah lived during a time of incredible injustice. He lived during the reign of some of the worst rulers in Israel's history. He lived at a time when the people of God had really lost their way, and they were following false gods, false prophets. Elijah was called by God to be zealous, zealously angry for God's people. And God gave Elijah the power to turn his anger, his zeal, into actual action. Gave him the power to confront fake news and lies and the systems of injustice and actually bring about change. Now, before I place Elijah up on a pedestal here, I should mention that when Elijah was a young man at the start of his journey, he wasn't always so good at discerning what type of anger he was feeling, and sometimes he misused that power God had given him. There was an incident, for instance, when some teenagers called him essentially Baldy because he was bald, and he sent a bear off to attack them. You know, like Jesus with the fig tree, he had his immensely human moments too. But as he matured, he became wonderfully faithful. He turned his anger toward the right things. He turned his anger toward the injustices that were happening around him, toward the lies that the people of God were being fed. Right before we picked up our passage today, Elijah powerfully demonstrates that the false prophets who've been spewing lies for the corrupt queen, He powerfully demonstrated that they were full of nothing but hot air. And he personally executed 500 of them. He went up against the dragon, so to speak, and he slayed it. He seemed to have this amazing ability to maintain and sustain a near constant zealous anger, a near constant anger at the injustices around him. And he seemed to be able to channel it into real change-making action. Until suddenly, one day he couldn't. After his zealous crusade, he hears that Queen Jezebel is coming after him, and he loses it. He has this complete meltdown, breakdown, whatever you want to call it. That's where we meet him in our scripture today. He's on the run. He's exhausted. He's had enough, as he tells God. His constant state of anger on behalf of God, anger at the injustices happening to God's people, it has utterly worn him out to the point that he's actually suicidal. He is so tired of being angry that he wants to die. He collapses under a bush and he falls asleep, and he sleeps and he sleeps and he sleeps. An angel, a messenger of God, wakes him and feeds him a snack and gives him some water, and then he falls right back asleep and he sleeps and he sleeps some more. Sounds a bit like depression to me. And then the angel of God wakes him again and feeds him yet again, tells him, you've got to eat because you don't have enough strength for this journey ahead. You've got to take some nourishment into your body. So again he eats, and then he sets out for Horeb, the mountain of God, and it's a 40-day journey through the wilderness. When he finally gets there, God has one question for him. What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? And Elijah tells God essentially, I have been zealously angry on your behalf, zealously angry for your people, but it is killing me. So God tells him to go and stand on the mountain, tells him he's going to have this opportunity to be in God's presence. So Elijah goes and stands at the mouth of the cave he's been staying in, and this great wind comes and tears the mountains apart. But God's not in that wind. And then an earthquake violently shakes the ground, but God is not in the earthquake. And then a fire comes and burns across the mountain, but God is not in the fire. And then finally, after the fire, Elijah hears this gentle whisper. And God is in that gentle whisper. The gentle whisper asks Elijah again, why are you here? Why are you here, Elijah? So Elijah repeats what he had said before, which essentially goes like this: I have been zealous on your behalf. I have been angry for your people, but it is killing me. And then God gives him instructions. And the instructions are basically how to go and appoint successors who can carry on the work that Elijah has started. So what does Elijah have to teach us about what to do when maintaining zealous anger at injustice has worn us out, burnt us out, has become unsustainable? Well, the first thing is never underestimate the power of a nap and a snack. It's something all parents and grandparents of toddlers know well, right? A nap and a snack can make all the difference. It is easy for our zeal, our zealous anger, to devolve into cranky anger, to turn into a meltdown if we're not taking care of ourselves, right? God will hold your zealous anger for you when you need to rest. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to turn off the news. It's okay to rest and rejuvenate. It's okay to restore yourself with some sustenance. The work of confronting justice, it doesn't just depend solely on you. It's God's work. And God will sustain it. God will sustain it. It won't fall apart just because you take a moment or even just because you take a good long break to rest. Second thing we learn, when you are feeling overwhelmed, seek out God. Seek out God even if it is a long, hard journey to find God. Because if you seek out God, God will reveal God's self to you. But it may not be loud or obvious. You may have to get very still and very quiet and listen past all of the storms around you to hear God. And when you finally do find God, God may have some hard questions for you. Like, why are you here? But go ahead and answer honestly. It's okay to admit you're tired or scared or overwhelmed or feeling alone. If you're like Elijah, what you're going to hear back is gentleness and compassion. And God may just show you a way forward you didn't see before. So that's the second thing. The third thing we learn from Elijah is God's call to zealous anger, to be angry enough at injustice that you actually do something about it. It's a team relay race. It's not a personal marathon. It's okay to pass the baton. As I said before, the work of fighting injustice, it's not just your personal work. It's God's work. And that call to do that work, it is shared by all of God's people. So do what you can while you can, and then go ahead and hand it off well. God will raise up others to take the torch, to hold all of that righteous anger, that zealous anger, when you can't. You know, anger is a little bit like fire. It's hard to hold it without being burned by it or burning up. We mentioned that in our call to worship today. Now, God can do it, of course. Moses learns that when he meets God at a bush that's burning but not burning up. But it's awfully hard for us human beings to maintain holding all that anger for very long. So here we are, friends. It's election season 2024. The injustices here in our land, they are front and center right before us, right? Our politicians are making sure of that. And fake news and lies and attacks on God's beloved, they are rampant all around us. And here in our local community, we are about to launch into our justice season, which will start with a listening process. These house meetings when we're going to share with each other all across the county about the injustices in our community that are personally affecting us. We're going to bring into the light those injustices that keep us up at night. And in the midst of all of this, we, you and me, we, the people of God, we are called to zealous anger. We are called to get righteously angry about what is wrong in our world and then channel our anger into change-making action. I'm not here today to tell you not to listen to that call. Listen to it. Follow that call. Follow it hard. Follow it faithfully. Follow it with passion and diligence. But don't forget the care instructions that come with it, because you're working with fire. So make sure you take a nap and you eat a snack along the way. Make sure you seek out God when you are overwhelmed and you quiet yourself enough to hear God amidst the storms. And when it is all too much for you, when it is quite literally killing you, when it is burning you up and burning you out, go ahead and listen to God's instructions for how to hand off that baton well. May God nourish us and care for us as we follow that call to righteous anger. Amen.